You're listening to the Live Free podcast. I'm your host, Christine, author, speaker, mentor, and guide. I'm here today to discuss living life after adversity, to discuss living life fully once again, a life of hope, peace, and resiliency, a life fully embodied. I utilize the lessons that I learned going through not one, but two primary cancers. I'm here today to guide you to your joy, turn your pain into power, and lead you back to yourself. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Live Free podcast. Today, I have the honor and privilege of having Jess Tetu on the podcast. Jess Tetu is a woman who needs no introduction. However, on the off chance that you haven't heard of her, I'll let you know a little bit about her. After overcoming adversity at a very young age, Jess began her adult life on her own at the age of only 15 years old. Through dedication, determination, and hard work, she has become a national award-winning philanthropist and entrepreneur. Jess is the sole owner of 5 Just For You day spas in Saskatchewan and Alberta. She's the founder and CEO of Reese Canada, the founder and CEO of iconic Betty Jewelry, the founder of Jess Tetu Consulting, and the founder and CEO of 471 Recovery Resources, which is a nonprofit charity that she's created. She was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40, awarded the Sask Entrepreneur of the Year Award, honored with YWCA Women of Distinction Award, and most recently received one of Canada's most coveted awards when she was named one of Canada's most powerful women. So, with all that said, you are sure that you are about to get an amazing podcast episode. So let's get started on the episode and enjoy. Hello, Jess. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's chat a little bit about your story, about your pain to power story, everything that happened with you. And so I will start first with, where in the world are you from?
So I actually grew up in a little small town halfway between Regina, Saskatchewan and Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. It's called Craik. Town of about 400 people. So I was born there. I was actually one of the last babies born in the town at all. Certainly in the hospital, I know there was like a little plaque with my name or something that was given to my mom or something. I was the last baby there. Weird story. But then I left there when I was 15. So that's kind of where I was born and grew up a little bit.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's very small. And a lot of us are from very small towns here. So I totally get you there. Same thing at a really small little town that I was from. So in your small town, without any privacy, there was lots of different things that happened with you. Let's chat about some of the points, some of the big moments in your life, because I know you've got a really powerful story to share.
I mean, yes, it's a very long story. So some of the bigger moments, I guess, would be my father struggled with alcohol addiction. And so really, I started to notice like the big kind of moments are, as a child, you only really remember the big things that kind of like, stick in your brain and never leave you or scar you, frankly. And so probably when I was 9 or 10 is when I really remember recognizing that things weren't right at home. I think spent our first nights in a women's shelter when I was, I want to say 10, maybe 11. And that was a really big changing moment for me, a very pivotal moment in my life where I recognized my family was different. Something wasn't right. It was very scary being in those shelters. I mean, I'm now 42 and I still remember that day at 10 years old like it was yesterday. I remember everything about those shelters, the smells, the items on the counter, the look of the room. I remember it vividly. So, when you can remember this many years later, that was a big moment. From there, things continued to progress. When there was police kind of at our house all the time. Those years really blend together. So I wouldn't say there's anything in between 10 and 15 that was very like pivotal and big and crazy. Other than my dad's addiction continued to worsen. And because of that, our family really struggled financially. So we had loss of power, loss of phones, lots of heat, loss of heat, I should say, lack of groceries. The church would drop off boxes of food for us. The people in the community would like help out with different things, pay our bills for us, get our phone turned back on. They would pay my basketball fees, all of those types of things. But really from 10 till 14, 15 was a bit of a blur of just chaos, frankly. And then at 15 was another really big pivotal moment when we actually lost our home because my parents were financially in such a bad situation. They weren't able to pay the mortgage payments, and we were already living in a low income home to begin with. And so losing our home that summer was really like such a moment of complete change. And at 15, I got on a bus and came to Saskatoon and started a life on my own. So I really went from being a 15-year-old, like have fun in the summer with your friends, pretend that it isn't chaos at home, to literally overnight taking care of myself, taking care of my father who was struggling with addictions. Financially, I was taking care of him and learning how to live as an adult. And that would be, I guess, the biggest, most pivotal moment in my life that I remember is like being on that bus at 15, coming to the city, terrified. I had really bad social anxiety. I didn't know what I was going to do, where I was going to go. It turned out okay. I got a job, registered at school, got an apartment, lied and said I was 18 so I could get an apartment. But my dad's addiction was still really bad during those years. So then there became a whole new level of adversity of trying to get to school when my father had drank too much the night before, or had been beaten up and was in the hospital for owing somebody money, and I taxied to school in the morning because I can drive. I was 15, but I would take a taxi to school in the morning because I knew that school was really important to me. I knew I needed to continue on, but at the same time, I was so worried about my father. I just couldn't really focus on my own world. So that was a pretty big time in my life for sure. Again, really just survival. I was really just in survival mode. There was not really any like living. It was really just like getting by month to month. But those would be my biggest, I think, in my early years. From that point on, obviously there was many other big adversity kind of moments in my life and in my career, but those were the ones as a child. That was a very long answer, so I apologize, but it's like a long story, so it's hard to break it into pieces, but those would be the most significant ones.
It's a very powerful story. I've had the privilege of hearing the full story, and it is, I know that listening to it, there was many moments of tears and there was moments of laughter, and these stories are never linear, right? And so you had so many ups and downs, and thank you for sharing the nutshell of it in a lot of ways. I'm curious, what are some of the ways that you were able to continue on? Because you do speak about how you went to school and you took these experiences and you turned them into a very powerful and beautiful business. All of these things that you've done. What kept you going at a very young age, realizing that you were going to be on your own?
I mean, I think that's kind of a multifaceted question, because I was very stubborn, number one. I was very angry.
That's great.
I was very angry at the world. I was angry at my parents. I was angry at the universe for just, in those moments when you're a child, you're not mature enough to understand what's happening or why. You can't really regulate your emotions. And so I was just angry at the world. I didn't understand why it was happening to my family, although I, knew obviously other people were going through much worse. It's just in that moment as a teenager when you just want to be like everyone else, right? And so being stubborn was probably a big piece of it, because I just was like, I didn't want that to be my life. And I was just really stubborn about that in particular. I didn't want this chaos and being poor and being, and struggling and having an addict father being my identity. And so I was just kind of stubborn about it. I hid my true lifestyle and life very much from the people I went to school with, the people I worked with. I protected the life I was living a lot. I really gave off the image that everything was rainbows and sunshine and great. And no one that I went to high school with, including my teachers or my friends or that I worked with, knew I lived on my own. It was something I worked very hard to protect. So yeah, I mean, being stubborn was a big piece of it. The other piece of it was that my dad always taught me, although he was struggling with addictions, he always taught me that education was really important. He always taught me to be very confident and very strong-willed, and that if you want to do something in life, like no one's going to do it for you. You got to get up and go do it for yourself. Nothing is handed to you. That sense of entitlement is like never there. You have to like work really hard. No job is beneath you. You work at, the crappiest job ever to work your way up to a better job, to work to a better job. And you treat everybody with respect and you're kind as often as possible. And he taught me to be kind in all things that I do. And so that kind of was just like the core of who I was. And then there was this moment where I realized it really was a choice. I could either choose to follow suit, like statistically children that live in a home with addictions do, or I could choose to create my own future. And I had to decide, I don't want to live that life. I don't want to follow that path. And I had to start even back then making little choices. Things like, for example, if I got invited to a party, or once I was bar age to go out to a nightclub or something, I more often than not kept it to a 3-drink minimum. I was never in a position where I wanted to feel out of control. Did I always follow that? No, because I was also a 19-year-old, at one point. So, but for the most part, I've been very strict about that. I've never been a big drinker. I didn't ever want to put myself in a position that might happen, because historically and genetically, my family was frankly doomed in terms of the world of addictions, or at least that's what I had been taught. And so I was very, very strict about being careful about those types of things. So I was making a conscious choice and a conscious effort in many different areas of my life. Always working, always having a job. That was big. Always having an education, not making choices that could go down a bad path or take me down a bad path. Things like drinking too much. I've never tried drugs. Never will, never have. And I wouldn't, because again, I knew very quickly I'd watched it destroy my family. I watched it destroy my father. I made conscious choices. So for me, a lot of it really was making decisions, even when I didn't know what those decisions would lead me to. It was more of making a decision about, well, I don't want to go that way. So, and I mean, it really was just a survival instinct for me to not go that path, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think these are really excellent, really poignant answers, because, anytime that I've interviewed anybody who moved forward in life in a way that now serves them, there's always the same theme: choices. All across the board. I could have sat in my victimhood, but I didn't. I made choices, realizing that this was the bed that was made for me, and so that I had to make a decision to get a different bed. Yeah.
I often say this on stage, and I say this a few different ways, but you can be the, victim or the victor, and you can let the pain control you, or you can use it as fuel to drive you. I actually had that quote put on a hoodie. Like, it's my quote, I say it all the time, but I got to put on a hoodie to just even remind myself how important it is that, like, you do get to make the decision. And yes, I could, see myself as a victim in those situations. And as I've become older, I've dealt with a lot of grief, and we can talk about that a little bit too. But even in those moments, again, it can be easy to fall back into like the victim mentality, which many times I would start to do, because that's just, I think, a human nature. And then I have to pull myself out of it and say, like, I have a choice to make here. I have a choice to decide to get back up. I have a choice to keep going. I have a choice to do something beautiful with this terrible thing. And so I really created opportunities in my career and opportunities in the heartache to create something beautiful and something light in something that once was so dark. And so once you do that once or twice, you start to realize like how much power you actually do have by making choices, conscious efforts and a choice. And so for me, it's been life-changing, and I live by that now. You can't control what happens to you, but you can certainly control how you respond to it. And that's just been life-changing for me when it comes to overcoming adversity.
Absolutely. And one thing that I noticed you say is that you said that you noticed that every time you made choices, things improved, and then that became something that drove you. And what's interesting to me is that you didn't ever say, I never felt sorry for myself. You just noticed that when you moved forward anyway, that's when shit got done.
Yeah. And, of course I felt sorry for myself. We all do when all hell breaks loose. We start to feel like, why me? Why is this happening to me? Like, I have the worst life. Like, we all do that. That's just like human nature, I think, especially as women, we're so hard on ourselves. But for me, I think it was also, it wasn't like, I'm going to be happy. Like, it doesn't work that way. It was never that easy. It was like, today I'm going to go have a shower. And then tomorrow I'm going to go have a shower and I'm going to like go for a walk, and it was one step in front of the other. And my grandmother actually said to me years ago, she just said, why are you so worried about the future? Just take one step, get to the end of today, and tomorrow just get to the end of tomorrow. And it became easier than trying to be like, where am I going to be in a year? How am I going to do this? After I left high school, I ended up in, which is very typical for children of addictions, even though I swore I was never going to become one of those statistics. I ended up in a relationship with someone who struggled with addiction. And when I had to leave that very domestically abusive relationship, it was impossible for me to think about anything more than just day by day. If I would think about a month or 2 months or 3 months, I would stay. Every single time I tried to think down the line, I stayed. And it was too terrifying. It was too scary. The fear of the unknown. What am I going to do? How am I going to do it? How am I going to provide for my child? All of these things. But when I just, ripped it off like a Band-Aid, left, and worried about one day at a time, I was able to take baby steps forward. And when you're taking baby steps forward, you don't realize how far you're getting until all of a sudden you look back one day and you're like, holy crap, look how far I've come. But for me, it was just honestly as simple as one day at a time. It was never like well, that sucked, I'm going to just decide I'm happy now. Like, that's not realistic. It was literal pulling myself out of the slums some days, many days actually.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that could be applied to everything. Like, I'm thinking about entrepreneurship. I'm thinking about the loss of somebody. I'm thinking about cancer, like all of these different things. How often you hear the cliche saying, 1 foot in front of the other, one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. How true that is.
And it is so, like you said, cliche, and it's cheesy and everybody says it until you actually have to do it. And then you go like, you don't notice you're doing it at the time though, right? Like, you don't really notice that you're just taking one step at a time, because it's just like all you can give. It's all you can manage. Until you look back, once you get into a little bit better of a headspace, I can look back and go like, I'm grateful that I was able to just do one day at a time. And like, I was able to see that and not get too far ahead of myself. Because if I got too far ahead of myself, I'd get overwhelmed and just do nothing. And I'd freeze. And that was a really big lesson. And then once you've done it, then I would compare it against the last time I had to just like, focus on getting a good night's sleep, making sure I was eating, because I would forget to eat when I was really stressed out. And, I would sleep at night. And then it became like, well, last time I had to focus on sleep and eating and I felt better. And then it was like, okay, well, getting outside and getting some exercise. And then it was like, okay, doing small tasks. And then you learn from experience. And like, that felt like crap when I did that. So I don't want to do that again. I'm going to try this time. And I mean, it's all a learning curve, right? Because there's no book on how to survive adversity. There just isn't, because to every person it's different, and how somebody responds to it is different, and everybody's pain is different, and how you respond to one thing might be completely different from the way somebody else responds to it, but they might respond to something else totally different. So I think it's always going to be like a learning curve, and learning to give yourself a bit of grace too, that it's not going to be a perfect journey, but just one step at a time, and we'll get there.
Certainly. Absolutely. I'm curious about, so we've got these baby steps, this one foot in front of the other. There was a point, however, that I know from your story that you transitioned from just survival to like thriving. And so I'm really curious, what was that step for you? When did things begin to transition? And of course, we always have ups and downs, and those things never change. But when did things begin to transition? When did you begin to empower?
So when the opportunity came to me for me to purchase the business that I'd been working at, most people would have been immediately like turned off by it, because I didn't have like family backing. I didn't have any family money. I didn't have any investors. I didn't have anybody to like give me anything. And so it was very unlikely that it was going to happen. But I really felt like, well, what do I have to lose? Like, what's the worst that can happen? It can't be, I've been to the low lows. I've been in, the worst situations. This isn't going to take me to that low. So what do I have to lose? And so once I kind of just like put myself out there and tried and kind of gave it my all, I started to see the reward in terms of the return on my investment in myself and in my brand and in my company. And when I started to see that return and that belief in other people and customers being loyal and supportive, I started to see a change in myself, that like my confidence level changed. I became like, maybe I can do really cool things. And it really was as simple as just like baby steps. And then I got a little bit more confident each time.
Wow, that's amazing. So you had the bravery to make a big choice, and that led to more evidence.
Wasn't even that big of a choice to me, really, because I was like, if it doesn't work, like,
Yeah.
And the number one question I get asked all the time is like, wasn't it terrifying? No, it wasn't terrifying to me, because if it doesn't work, I'm exactly where I was. Whereas I've been to like, hell in my heart and brain, that being in a like women's shelter, writing on the walls, I hate it here and I want to die, and watching my dad OD, and all the different things that like the traumatic things I experienced, like being on a bus at 15 years old and watching, not knowing where I was going. Like, that's fear. This was like, if it doesn't work, big deal. Like, it just was different. It wasn't really scary to me. It was challenging. It was interesting. It was a journey for sure, but it wasn't fear for me. It just wasn't. To me, fear was just on a different level. And so I thought like, what do I got to lose? And then when I started to see it working, I started to go like, you really do have control over like what you can do in life. Like, you really can create something from nothing, and you really can live a big, beautiful life if you came from nothing. And I think growing up, I always believed that like, if you grew up from that, that's what my life was going to be like forever. And I just didn't know any other way, right? I didn't know any other. I always hoped I would do something special. And I always kind of believed I maybe had something in me to do something, magical or something different or unique or big. But until you start to do it and recognize your own like talent or your own work ethic and your own, drive, I didn't even know that was inside of me until I started to do it. And then I was like, oh my God, like I could really change my life here. And then maybe by doing that, I could really change other people's lives, which is like really cool. And so it just kind of became this like, what's my next challenge? Like, I loved the feeling of accomplishment, and it really just made me believe in myself, but baby steps, because I was certainly insecure at the beginning. I went into it very blindly. I was 21 years old. I mean, no one's a good boss at 21, So I made a lot of mistakes, but it's because of those mistakes that I am who I am now. And because of those mistakes that my business is successful, and that I've done the things I've done. I don't regret many of them, very few.
Right. So you didn't wait to believe in yourself. You started with messy action, which resulted in belief.
There was always a piece of me that like believed I was meant for something more than the life that I was living. I knew that. So that piece I did know. I always actually thought I was going to be a lawyer because I always thought that lawyers help families like mine and they protect kids like me. And so I thought that's my future. That's what I'm going to do. And then I fell in love with this spa industry and was just like blindsided by this like world that I'd never experienced, this like calm and tranquility. Like I've never experienced calm and tranquility. My world was chaos at all times and loud and shocking and traumatizing. And I'd never experienced that. So all of a sudden it was just different. And I just fell in love with it so much. And then I started to like try, but I can't say I went into it not knowing that I was capable, because I did. There was a piece of me that always believed I was meant for something more than the chaos, more than the trauma, more than the adversity. But I didn't know that this level of like living in happiness and health and, you know, a dream could be fulfilled. I hoped it could be, but that was learned along the way.
Right. Little nudges, I guess, is what you received. Little nudges.
Definitely a piece of my heart and my mind that knew I was meant for much more than what life was throwing at me.
Love that. I love that. I have the same nudge that always says that to me too. And so, I mean, that's why you move forward, right? Because it keeps telling you, right?
And often we downplay it and shut it down, like, oh no, I couldn't do that. And society does that too, right? And says like, no, you know, stay within your little box, like don't do anything too crazy. And like, you know, and that's where all the negative Nellies come in and try to like knock you down or have something negative to say. And it's pushing through that and just kind of doing it anyway is where you come out the other end and go like, oh, I'm so glad I trusted in myself and listened to my inner guide.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. How moving into empowering other people, speaking on stages, coaching people to start their own businesses, what fueled that? Like, when did that really come into place for you?
So public speaking, I never had any interest in doing, never in a million years. If you ask my mom or my sister, you know, 20 years ago, they would have been like zero chance, because I had such bad social anxiety that I couldn't even order pizza. I couldn't, like, if somebody rang the doorbell, I would like hide. I just did not like interacting with people, because any of the experiences, and I've learned this through therapy now, but like most of the experiences that I had were just like traumatic. I didn't like police being around. I didn't like talking to adults because they were asking me questions. And so I became very like socially reserved sort of. And then, I'd opened my first business, was doing quite well. And my best friend that I'd grown up with my entire life, absolute best friend, like more like a sister, was now a teacher. And she was in YWCA, Alberta, teaching high school. And she reached out to me and said like, Jess, and I just won a couple of awards. And like, she's like, is there any way, I know you don't like talking to people, but is there any way you'd come talk to these students? They are struggling with like very similar things, like family addictions, homelessness, poverty, you know, all of these types of things. I had now in my life moved away from, I'd left the domestic abuse relationship. I was now remarried to an incredible, amazing, wonderful man that I'm with now, that I've been with for 20 years. And I had kids and I was doing amazing. My dad was finally stable and sober, and he was with a woman from the time I was in grade 12 till forever. They were together. And she was like a second mom to me, and she was incredible and amazing and wonderful. So I felt like finally like, oh, I made it. Like you know what, maybe I can go talk to these kids and say like, I made it through it all. And so I phoned my dad and I asked him, because it was always important to me to be respectful. This was not just my story. This was our story. And primarily it was his addiction that really broke our family up. And he knew that. And he was always very self-conscious of that. And so I asked him, you know, if I could have permission. And he didn't really obviously know anybody in YWCA, Alberta. So, and everybody knew, anyone that knew him knew he struggled anyway. So I asked his permission if it would be okay if I went and help. You know, and his response was exactly what I thought it would be. He said, you know, if you can help some kids, you absolutely need to do so. My dad, just kindest heart you'd ever see, struggle with addictions that made him do awful things. However, kindest, sweetest, most intelligent man ever. And so I did. I went and spoke to them and I cried, you know, and I have pictures. I look back now and I think how far I've come in terms of speaking, but I had never spoken those words publicly and almost proudly to anyone ever before. And meanwhile, there's a group of grade 8 to grade 12s, like nothing like throwing me to the wolves the first time I ever speak, like the hardest people to speak to. And they were so like, just like in it, like they were just, you could have heard a pin drop in that room. And then they asked questions and I just poured my heart out. I apologize for crying because I said like, this is my life. Like I'm not reading a book. This is my life. And the hugs and the feedback after, and the letters and the Instagram messages and the emails and all the things that came in after shocked me to hear other kids say like, that's me, that's my story, that's my life, that's my, you know. And as I sat there, I could see them, you know, wiping tears from their eyes, and I could almost pick out that one must have addictions in her family, that one has something, like I could see it in their faces. And so I remember looking out and being like, you're talking to you, Jess, you're talking to 15-year-old you. What would you say? What would you tell yourself back then? And so it was a really emotionally charged speaking engagement. Again, I wasn't very good, I don't think, because I'd never done it before. I was very inexperienced. I didn't know how to connect with people, and it was very emotional. I couldn't hold back once it started to, you know, come out. But it did well, obviously. And it was only a month later that my dad passed away. So a bit of a trigger warning here for anyone that might be listening, but my dad was found frozen to death. So he was walking home from a pub, and he was not very far from his home, like from his front door, and he passed away. And so that just like shook up and shocked my world. And so again, I built this beautiful world and thought everything was better, and then all of a sudden it wasn't. And then from that point, I felt like my life just started to, I'd been on such a high from the moment I left that abusive relationship. I was on a high, and I felt like there was no stopping me and success of the business. And I just I'd opened multiple locations, and I was built a skincare line and beauty line, and was doing all these things, and had started speaking lots, and I was sharing, and knowing I had my dad's, you know, permission, gave me the encouragement to help kids. And then my dad died, and it just started to like go right back down. And in my mind, the bottom was where I came from. So it was terrifying, but I felt like I was on this like downhill roller coaster that I couldn't slow down. I couldn't stop. I couldn't get off of. And it did. I went from being at like the highlight of my world, feeling like I made it, like I'd done it, got away from that life, you know, and it just tanked. My younger brother started to struggle with like extreme addictions. We almost lost him. That was extremely traumatizing for me because he was my baby brother. And, you know, there was some really, really rough moments in that, without getting into too much detail. It was very, very extreme. And, you know, we put him into treatment, and he was well, then he wasn't, then he was, then he wasn't, you know, as is the life of world of addictions. And then my stepmom, right before that, Allie, my best friend who got me to come speak at her school, was diagnosed with breast cancer. And very quickly, very tragically, she passed away. And I was with her when she passed away. And so it was a shock. We weren't expecting it. She had been cleared. We were told she was cancer-free. You know, she rang the bell, she was done her treatments. And it was just like, we thought her lungs had some fluid. It just was like a bad day that turned into a nightmare. And I'm very grateful that I was there, but it was also one of the most traumatizing moments of my life, is holding my best friend's hand and like watching her pass away. And then exactly 30 days later, my stepmom commits suicide. And so that was my dad's girlfriend, on again, off again girlfriend. And like, I had no idea she was struggling at all. I'd just seen her. She was just at my spa a couple days before. And so it became this, and then my brother again was struggling again. It just became this like literal nosedive. And as much as I would throw myself into like the business and trying to do things in my community and help, it helped keep me from like crashing and burning. But it was just, I felt like I was on this like downward spiral that I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. And then that's really when I recognized that like, you can't control what happens to you. You have no control over what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. And I started making conscious choices and started to do good, kind-hearted things in regards to each of the areas where I was really struggling in things like, you know, supplying items to women's shelters, or doing a winter jacket collection in honor of my dad, or putting people through treatment, or helping the children of a parent that's going into treatment go into treatment themselves and get therapy. Because you can help the person that's struggling, but what happens to like the butterfly effect, the children, right? And so I started doing that. Then I started recognizing how lonely it can be as an owner and as an entrepreneur, and how I got it. I understood what that felt like. So if I could help, like, hold the hand of another entrepreneur and help them through those lonely days and those hard moments, I felt that was really empowering for me and very helpful. It really filled the hole in my heart. And I really just started to realize that like helping other people was my medicine. It was what helped me. And so not only doing that in the spa world, but speaking on stage and talking to students and talking to women and all of those things, and then helping entrepreneurs and coaching. So that's how it kind of all organically just happened, because of something really painful and making a conscious choice that I can't change what happened to me, but I can certainly walk somebody else through this dark time and help them make it a little less shitty. And then speaking just kind of took off and became this whole entity of its own, where I started, I'm so honored and so grateful for it, but I started speaking all across Canada and doing these big, beautiful, amazing, incredible events. And again, the most rewarding piece was the women reaching out after, saying like, you changed my life. You got me out of a domestic abusive relationship. I felt like you get me. I felt like, you gave me a reminder to keep fighting my cancer battle. You gave me the courage to go after the job I want, or get some therapy, or whatever it was, and that was the most rewarding, fulfilling thing I ever could have done in my world. And when you realize like, I can't go back and protect myself from it, but if I can help somebody else prevent them from going through similar feelings, or not even prevent, but let them feel less alone, I have to do it. And so, being a public speaker, you get ridiculed a lot for putting yourself in the public eye and, putting yourself out there. And especially as a business owner, the assumptions are made that like, oh, rich, spoiled daddy's girl. I get that lots. Literally the polar opposite.
Yeah.
Literally polar opposite. But, and you just have to kind of take it with, I'll take it, I'll listen to it, because there's nothing I can do, but it doesn't matter because I'm changing this person's life. So say what you want to say about me. At the end of the day, I'm not here to make you happy. I'm here to help her, and in the room of 1,000 people, more often than not, I'll get like 200 or 300 messages after, if it's an event really big, if it's a really big event. And some smaller events, I'll get 10 messages, but you know what, to that one person in that room you connected with, you made a difference for them. It's worth every moment of ridicule you get by putting yourself out there. And so at the beginning, it was very hard to take that feedback and keep going and not want to just throw in the towel and say like, I'm not the right person for this. Like, people think I'm into myself, or they think I'm conceited because I'm standing on stage with a microphone, or, all the things that people say about someone when they become successful. And then you get that feedback and it's just like, doesn't matter. Say what you want. I'm helping that girl because that's what I'm doing. Right. And so, I mean, it's all intertwined, I guess, like all of the big, beautiful, amazing things I get to do now. And the reasons I do all those things are related specifically to things that tried to knock me down.
Absolutely. My goodness, it's extraordinary. And, I'm actually brought back to when you said that you were really, really private. You didn't tell anybody. You were really guarded. And then the most healing thing you did was shed all of that.
I was so ashamed of it. So even when people would say to me, how did you start your business? Like, tell us your story. My story started from the day my business was successful, and I would share only the highs. And it actually was now she's a friend of mine, but she was a client of the spas. And we were at a really small event, and she actually called me out from the back of the room, like raised her hand when we asked for any questions. And she's like, what about everything that happened before that? What about your father's addiction? What about your pregnancy losses? What about and I was just like, I remember feeling so angry at her for outing me, and because I was like, oh my God, no one's going to support my business now. They're going to think like, oh, this girl comes from trailer trash life. She, and no one's going to support me. And in fact, the absolute opposite happened. People were like, I relate to that, actually. Like, good for you to get out of that. And it was the safety of who I was sharing it with. that made me confident and comfortable in doing so. But it took a long time. I never told the story like I do now for a long time. It was like comfort a little bit at a time. I would open up a little bit more and open it. And then when other people would share their stories with me, it would give me more courage and a reminder to be like, just share it. You're going to help somebody today. And now I can just, it is what it is. That's my life. I've got no shame left in it. Right. But for a long time, I was controlled and confined by that shame.
Right.
And now
Absolutely.
I'm proud of it. Now I'm so proud of, there's things that, I'm disappointed that happened in my life. Obviously, I don't love losing, a few really important people in my world and struggling with some of those things. Of course, nobody wishes for that. But, I don't really have any regrets because now I do these things and help other people because of that. And so the shame is really behind me at this point.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And, I can't help but be in absolute reverie of everything that you've accomplished, because it truly is such a natural. The way that it happened was so natural. You were never in it specifically to stand on stages. It was that you had this background belief that you could help not only yourself to not be in this place anymore, but others to not be there too. And then it naturally inclined in that way.
And hearing people after share the most private, and I'm telling you, the most private things ever that they've never shared with anyone. They will literally, hi, Jess, it's so nice to meet you. And then it's just like, they'll share because they finally feel like somebody is listening and that they're in a safe space. And then, you do that. I get up and tell my story. That's one story. And then, to have 100 people tell me theirs after, and I'm such an empath. I like carry it all, but it gives me so much more courage and like motivation to continue to do it, because I think it's so important. The amount of times I've heard people say to me, your story is my story. Like I get that all the time. That's the number one thing I hear. Oh my God, it was like you were telling my story. And yet so many people will say, oh my God, that's so, your story is such a big story. It's so crazy or so different. I'm like, it's really not. I just happen to be brave enough to talk about it. We're actually much more alike than we are different. And I think we all have that story. We all have that hurt, that pain, that, grit in us. Not everybody has to share. Not everybody, will want to or need to, but they need to at least understand that they're not alone. Certainly. That there's other people that are out there that get it, that get what you're feeling.
Yes. And we all go through a story. I was talking to Laura Lawrence, and she said a frying pan moment. Everyone has a frying pan moment where everything just fries. And it's so true.
20 of those.
That's right. Yes.
Never ending frying pan moments, and there's always someone that has a worse frying pan story than the next, but you can't compare pain. You just have to stand together in it. And then when you see someone else in it, lend them a hand, or be there. And
truly
just listen.
That's the definition of alchemy. You've taken one thing and you've turned it into another. So I'm curious what you might tell someone in the same situation, because you did say that. You said, I'm talking to me when I was young. What did you say? What would you say?
I share obviously like all the different little pieces of my journey, but the most important thing I think is just saying, like, you're not alone. Like, I get it. And it is possible. I know you don't think it is. I know you think, because I thought this too, that life is just this piece of your world. I actually had a girl reach out to me not long ago. I just spoke in a school not too long ago. And she reached out and she's like, for the first time, a light bulb, and she was highly suicidal. She was struggling really bad. She explained all of that to me. And she said, for the first time, I realized, oh my God, my home life really is done as soon as I graduate. And then I have the choice to do whatever I want. She's like, I never even thought outside of what I was living in right now. I didn't know that there was like hope to do anything. And she's like, for the first time, it was like a light bulb went off for me that I realized like I could make it another year and then I get to do whatever I want to do in this life. And she's like, it never crossed my mind. Like, how sad is that? That it never crossed my mind that my life won't always be this way. And I said, I know, because I was there. I get it. I know what it feels like to be all encompassing. And when you're a child, especially, it's all you know. It's all, these are the people that are supposed to take care of you and protect you. And so the reason we fall into the same cycle is because it's comfortable and it's what we know. So if you can talk to that young girl ahead of time and say like, this doesn't have to be, you have to make a choice, but it doesn't have to look like that. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter, you know, what life throws at you or the, you know, what the hand you've been dealt looks like. You do get to choose. You get to choose to make it better. You can choose to believe in yourself. You can choose to try harder. You can choose to keep trying. So those are some of the big things I say, but the biggest piece is just, I know you're not alone. I know I've been there. And if I can do it, you can do it. And then I love to also remind people that, you know, what if I would have talked to somebody? What if I would have asked for help? And that's the reason why I'll continue talking at schools, is because like, what if the next little girl is braver than I was and will ask for help and doesn't hide her story and does say like, hey, you know what? I'm living on my own at 15 years old. I'm barely eating. I'm taking care of my father financially. Like, I need some help. Like, what would have happened if I would have asked for help? What if I was brave enough? What if there was an adult standing in front of me saying to me, I've been there, Jess, I get it. I get you. You're not alone. Just ask for help. Tell me. That to me is just priceless. I think of that often. Like, what if somebody would have been standing in front of me? What would I have wanted to hear? And what I would have wanted to hear is, it's okay. You can ask for help. You know, it doesn't have to be, your teacher that knows your mom and dad. Like, if you reach out to a stranger, I'll get you in touch with like, you know, a guidance counselor at a different place, or here's some resources of someone to talk to here, or, because I know I would never, especially in a small town, have gone to our local teachers or guidance counselor to tell them anything that was going on, because they know who I'm talking about. Or they're going to tell my parents, or they're going to tell the other teachers, or, you know, and I hear that from students often. Well, I'm not telling my guidance counselor because she's just going to tell the other teachers and then everybody will know. I get that all the time. And so to be able to know that there's other resources, it doesn't have to be your guidance counselor at your school. You know, there's 1-800 numbers. There's all sorts of different, especially now with the focus being on mental health more than ever. And so just being that voice to say like, there's resources out there, like ask for help. It can change your life. It could, you know, there's people like me that have been exactly where you are. I get it. And you get to decide what your future looks like. And I mean, that changes depending on who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to a group of women about domestic abuse, I'll say the same thing there. Like, I get it. I've been there. I know it feels hopeless. Like there's no escape and you have no help. And, you know, you just need one strong moment. And I say the things that I needed to hear back then. Like, don't go to the group around you that are friends with mutual friends of your spouse. Go to people outside of that have a, you know, outside no connection that can give you genuine support. And then same thing with entrepreneurs. I'll say to them, I get it. I know what it feels like. I know how lonely it is. I've been there. I've walked in your shoes. Let me help you avoid falling in the holes that I fell in. And that's, to me, feels like a privilege to be able to go and warn people or help them or guide them from making the same mistakes that I did. Because I can't go back and help that 15-year-old girl on a bus, but I can help that one, you know, or that one. And if I can, then I absolutely should. I think it's a full circle moment for me that I get to now do the things that I do, being the little girl that was at the women's shelter, you know, now raising money for the women's shelters and going back to them and then going to speak at events, fundraising for the women's shelter. It's just such a full circle moment to say to that little girl that's in that women's shelter, this doesn't have to be the rest of your life. Someday you could be on stage raising thousands and thousands of dollars for the exact shelter that you thought you were going to die in. And for me, that's just such a purpose. I don't have to do it, but it's an honor to do it.
Yeah, a full circle moment.
Completely.
Yes. Wow. Well, that is an impactful spot to end. If anybody is interested in connecting with you through, whether it be your coaching or any of the other public speaking works, how can they get connected with you?
The best way is my website, just my name, JessTetu.com. And my last name is pronounced Tetu. You did it amazing. Most people butcher it, which is hilarious. And I just answered all of it now. But it's TETU. So JessTetu.com. Or Instagram is honestly, most people message me on Instagram because that's just the way that people communicate now. But I will always respond. Always, always, always. It just might take me a few days, but I will always respond to people. And for coaching, I am taking new clients. I only have a few spots left for this year, but next fall, I'll be opening my schedule up again and taking some new mentorship clients and opening up my book a little bit bigger. It's probably my favorite thing to do aside from helping, like standing on stage and helping people. It's the most rewarding. So if you need help in your business, like I get it, I've been there. I know what it feels like to not feel like you have somebody to hold your hand through the really hard moments, because your spouse won't always be that person. And most entrepreneurs will be like, oh my God, yes. But yeah, so that's the easiest way to reach me.
Yes.
Social media.
Excellent. Got it. Okay. Well, I will write all that down. Thank you again for being part of the podcast, for sharing your vulnerable story, and for inspiring so many.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you loved this last episode, then consider rating the podcast. Those few seconds that it takes makes a huge difference. Also, if you are interested in mentorship, transformational programs, or reading the book Unbroken, Rising Above, Thriving Within, then take a look at the show notes for all the resources and links. Always remember, you can overcome any obstacle. Let's do this together.